5 years of birthday cards returned to sender, and I'm sitting here staring at Facebook photos of my granddaughter blowing out candles I should have helped her bake. My name is Madeline Clark, I'm 65 years old, and I haven't seen my grandchildren since my son decided I was toxic. Apparently wanting to protect a 7-year-old from sleepovers with strangers makes me controlling. But that's what happens when you marry someone who records private conversations and weaponizes them against you. The whole mess started so small, you'd think it was normal family stuff. I'd suggest earlier bedtimes because the kids looked exhausted. I'd question why a 4-year-old needed organic everything when regular food raised my son just fine. And yes, I showed up with gifts sometimes without calling first. Sue me for wanting to surprise my grandchildren. Michelle, my daughter-in-law, who's 38 and acts like she invented parenting, would get that tight smile whenever I walked in. The kind that says we'll discuss this later to my son Jeffrey. He's 40 now, built like his father with those broad shoulders that come from actual construction work, not a gym. And just like his father, he hates confrontation until he explodes. So when Michelle started her campaign about boundaries and respect, he went along with it to keep the peace. Because that's what you do when you're married to someone who keeps score of every slight. The final straw came when I told my granddaughter, Emma, that sleepovers at houses where I didn't know the parents weren't safe. She was 7, for God's sake. 7-year-olds don't need to sleep at strangers' houses just because their parents want a night off. But Michelle had already told Emma it was fine, so of course I was undermining them. Of course I was overstepping. What I didn't know was that Michelle had started recording our conversations. Smart girl, I'll give her that. She sent the audio to Jeffrey as proof that I couldn't respect their parenting decisions. His voice still echoes in my head sometimes. You're toxic and controlling, just like Dad was. I won't let you do to my kids what you did to me. That stung because my husband Robert had been controlling. I found out after he died how controlling when I discovered he'd been screwing his secretary for 3 years while telling me he was working late. But I never told Jeffrey about that because why destroy a dead man's reputation? Some secrets you take to the grave, even when they're eating you alive. The lawyer's letter arrived on a Tuesday. Cease all contact or face a restraining order. Very official, very final. I tried apologizing, explaining that I just wanted to be part of their lives. I even drove over once to talk it through face to face, but Jeffrey threatened to call the police. So I stopped. What choice did I have? 5 years of watching Emma grow up through scattered photos that mutual friends would accidentally share on Facebook before quickly untagging me. 5 years of wondering if she still remembers our baking lessons, or if Michelle has scrubbed those memories clean too. 5 years of Christmas mornings with presents I'll never give, and birthday cakes I'll never see blown out. I kept working my bookkeeping clients because sitting still meant thinking too much. Kept the rental properties running because money doesn't manage itself. Kept busy so I wouldn't drive by their house just to catch a glimpse of the kids in the yard. But the photos on my mantle collected dust, and the silence in this house got so thick sometimes I'd turn on the TV just to hear voices. Then last Tuesday night around 9:30 when I was getting ready for bed, the doorbell rang. Nobody visits me that late. Hell, nobody visits me at all anymore. I looked through the peephole and nearly didn't recognize him. Jeffrey stood on my porch looking like he'd been hit by a truck. His dark hair was a mess, his work shirt wrinkled like he'd slept in it, and his eyes were red-rimmed from crying. This from a man who hadn't cried since his father's funeral. He couldn't even look at me when I opened the door. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked like he was 16 again. "I need help." I let him in without a word because what else do you do when your child shows up broken? He slumped into the kitchen chair where he used to do homework 25 years ago, and for a moment he looked exactly like that scared kid who'd gotten his first F in math. "Michelle's been cheating on me," he said, staring at his hands. "With Brian, my business partner Brian, for over a year. Brian Cunningham, 42 years old, married with kids of his own, and Jeffrey's partner in the construction company they'd built from nothing. The betrayal was so complete it took my breath away. She moved out last week," Jeffrey continued. "Took Emma and Tyler to Brian's house, cleaned out our bank accounts while she was at it. Her lawyer's demanding everything in the divorce, the house, the cars, half the business, and she's fighting for full custody, saying I'm an unfit father because of my depression and drinking. I wanted to say I'd seen this coming, that Michelle always had calculating eyes that reminded me too much of my husband's secretary, but Jeffrey was falling apart in front of me, and sometimes being right hurts worse than being wrong. She coached me," he whispered. "All those things I said to you about boundaries and respect. She'd sit me down after your visits and point out everything you'd done wrong. Made me practice what to say when you called. I thought I was protecting my marriage, but she was just isolating me from anyone who might have seen through her." His voice broke completely then. I haven't had a real conversation with anyone in years. She made sure of that. And now she's using my depression against me, saying I can't handle the kids. The drinking started after we cut you off, Mom. I felt so guilty, but she said, it proved I'd made the right choice, that you were toxic enough to drive me to drinking. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a stack of papers, spreading them across my kitchen table. Bank statements, vendor invoices, receipts, the guts of their business laid bare. I need to prove she doesn't deserve half the company, he said desperately. I printed everything before she could hide it. Look at these invoices, Mom. Look at the amounts. Some of these vendors I've never even heard of. My bookkeeping eye kicked in automatically. 30 years of catching other people's financial mistakes makes you see patterns fast, and the patterns in these documents made my blood run cold. Payments to Sunshine Landscaping for $3,400 when I knew damn well Jeffrey's crew did their own site prep. Invoices from Premier Office Solutions for supplies that should have cost half as much. Vendor addresses that were just P.O. boxes. Amounts that didn't match the work described. Michelle hadn't just been cheating with Brian, she'd been stealing from both of them. Jeffrey, I said slowly, these invoices are fake. She's been embezzling. His head snapped up. What? Look, I pointed to a payment for electrical work that was dated the same day as 2 other electrical invoices. No job needs 3 different electrical contractors on the same day. And this amount for plumbing supplies? For a bathroom renovation? This would buy plumbing for a whole house. I could see him struggling with old resentments even as the evidence mounted. His jaw was tight, his shoulders defensive. He wasn't here because he wanted to be. He was here because Michelle had taken everything else. I can help you, I said. Money for a lawyer, a place to stay, whatever you need. He hesitated so long I could hear the kitchen clock ticking. Finally, I can't handle you getting involved and making things worse like you always do. I just need a loan and I'll handle the rest myself. Like I always do. The words hit exactly where he meant them to hit. But I wrote him the check anyway. $20,000. Enough for a decent lawyer and some breathing room. Enough to help him fight for his kids. He folded it carefully and put it in his wallet without meeting my eyes. Thank you, he said, standing up. I'll pay you back. I know you will. He gathered up the documents, but some of the invoices scattered in the process. He was too exhausted to chase them all down, too proud to ask for help picking them up. I watched him walk to the door with his shoulders carrying the weight of everything he'd lost. Jeffrey, I called after him. He turned back, hope and wariness fighting in his expression. You're a good father, I said. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. His face crumpled for just a second before he got control again. Then he was gone, and I was alone with the scattered financial documents that proved his wife was a thief. I sat back down at the kitchen table and stared at the evidence of Michelle's crimes. Vendor invoices that wouldn't stand up to 5 minutes of scrutiny. Bank statements showing systematic theft disguised as legitimate business expenses. A paper trail that could probably send her to prison if someone wanted to pursue it. Jeffrey said he'd handle it himself. He wanted me to stay out of it, respect his boundaries, let him manage his own life like an adult. But I was a bookkeeper for 30 years. I knew what these documents meant, and I knew how to use them. I also knew my daughter-in-law well enough to understand that she'd fight dirty in court, use every weapon she had to take my grandchildren away from their father. The smart thing would be to trust Jeffrey to handle it. The respectful thing would be to stay out of his business like he'd asked. The safe thing would be to avoid proving Michelle right about me being controlling and interfering. I picked up one of the fake invoices and studied Michelle's careful forgery. She'd gotten very good at playing the victim while systematically destroying my family, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the woman who taught her how to balance the books in the first place. I told myself I was going to respect his boundaries. Really, I did. For about 48 hours, I was the picture of maternal restraint. Then I started calling him every morning at 7:30, right when I knew he'd be getting ready for work. Just to check in, I said. See how he was holding up. Offer to watch Emma and Tyler if he managed to get visitation rights. And hey, I'd researched 5 different divorce attorneys in the area. Did he want their contact information? Mom, I appreciate it, but I can handle this, he kept saying, his voice getting tighter each day. Handle it? The man was drowning and refusing the life preserver. Michelle's attorney was a shark who specialized in high-asset divorces, and Jeffrey could barely afford the public defender equivalent. Every day brought new disasters. His kids were coming home from school asking why Daddy was dangerous and unstable. Apparently, Michelle had been very busy with her storytelling. Mark had started freezing him out of business decisions, claiming Jeffrey was too emotionally compromised to make sound judgments. By the end of the second week, I couldn't take it anymore. Jeffrey looked like a ghost when he stopped by to update me. Hollow-eyed, 20 pounds thinner, jumping every time his phone buzzed with another legal threat. So I made a decision that seemed logical at the time. If I could prove Michelle was destroying multiple families, maybe I could find an ally in this mess. I called Mark's wife, Sarah. Mrs. Cunningham? This is Madeline Clark, Jeffrey's mother. I think we need to talk about what our spouses have been doing behind our backs. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then she started crying. Turns out Sarah had suspected something was wrong for months. Late meetings, mysterious phone calls, Mark coming home smelling like unfamiliar perfume and claiming it was from a client. But Michelle and Mark had been careful. No obvious evidence, no smoking guns. Just a wife's intuition telling her something was off. I gave her the dates Jeffrey had mentioned. The business trips that weren't really business trips. The emergency meetings that happened to coincide with Jeffrey being out of town. Within an hour, Sarah was at a divorce attorney's office with a timeline that made everything crystal clear. Mark's marriage exploded that same day. Sarah filed immediately, demanding everything and making it public enough that their kids' school friends started talking. Mark went from smug business partner to desperate man, trying to save his reputation overnight. One down, one to go. I called Michelle directly the next morning. "I'd like to meet with you," I said when she answered. "About the children's well-being during this difficult time." Her voice was steady, almost warm. "Of course, Madeline. I think that's very mature of you. How about coffee tomorrow at that little place on Maple Street?" She agreed so quickly it should have been a warning. Sign. But I was feeling victorious after watching Mark's world crumble, and I thought I finally had some leverage. The coffee shop was nearly empty at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. Michelle arrived right on time, looking perfectly put together in a cream blouse and black skirt. She even hugged me hello like we were still family. "I'm so glad you called," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I've been hoping we could find a way to work together for Emma and Tyler's sake." Work together. Like she hadn't spent years systematically destroying my relationship with my son and grandchildren. "I know this situation is difficult for everyone," I started. "But those children need stability and they need their father." "Absolutely," Michelle interrupted, her smile never wavering, "which is why I've been working so hard to document Jeffrey's struggles. I want to make sure the court understands exactly what kind of environment the children would be living in." She reached into her purse and pulled out a tablet, setting it on the table between us like she was presenting evidence at trial. "I've been very thorough," she said, swiping to what looked like a digital filing system. Every instance of mood swings, every drinking episode, every angry outburst, photos, audio recordings, witness statements. My coffee suddenly tasted like ash. "You've been spying on your own husband?" "Protecting my children," she corrected gently. "For years, actually. Long before this divorce business started." She showed me screenshots of text messages. Jeffrey admitting he felt overwhelmed. Jeffrey saying he'd had too much to drink after a bad day. Jeffrey complaining about work stress and family pressure. "And then there's this," she said, swiping to another folder. Communications where Jeffrey discusses his family situation. The messages filled the screen. My son's words, sent to his wife during our worst fights 5 years ago. "She's impossible to deal with. Shows up without calling, undermines our parenting, acts like she knows better than us about everything. I know you're right about setting boundaries. My mom is controlling just like my dad was. Sometimes I think she's toxic and doesn't even realize it." Each message felt like a slap. But Michelle wasn't done. "The court needs to understand that this isn't just about Jeffrey's personal struggles," she continued, her voice taking on a sympathetic tone that made my skin crawl. "This is about a family pattern of dysfunction and manipulation. The children have been exposed to this toxic dynamic their entire lives." She scrolled to another section, voice recordings of Jeffrey during his worst moments, yelling about work, cursing about money problems, slurring his words after too many beers while venting about his mother interfering again. "I've been trying to protect Emma and Tyler from this chaos for years," Michelle said. "They've seen their father's instability. They've witnessed their grandmother's attempts to control and manipulate family decisions. They've lived through the stress and conflict this family creates." My hands were shaking. "You coached him? You made him say those things about me." "I supported him in recognizing unhealthy patterns," she said smoothly. "Just like I'm supporting our children now by ensuring they have a stable, peaceful home environment." She closed the tablet and looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Madeline, I know you think you're helping, but this is exactly what I'm talking about. Jeffrey asked you to stay out of this situation, to let him handle his own life like an adult. Instead, you're here trying to manipulate the outcome. Again." The accusation hit home because it was true. I was manipulating. I was interfering. I was doing exactly what Jeffrey had asked me not to do. Those children are my grandchildren, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. And they'll be much healthier without the chaos this family brings. Michelle replied, I hope someday you'll understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step away. She stood up, leaving a $5 bill on the table for her untouched latte. I'll see you in court, Madeline. The drive home was a blur of rage and panic. I'd walked into that coffee shop thinking I was finally playing chess instead of checkers, only to discover Michelle had been playing three-dimensional chess for years, while I was still trying to figure out the rules. But I didn't have long to process my humiliation. My phone rang as I was pulling into my driveway. Jeffrey's voice was raw with fury. What the hell did you do? Jeffrey, Sarah Cunningham called me. She's filing for divorce because you told her about Mark's affair. Michelle's attorney is now claiming I'm part of a conspiracy with my manipulative mother to destroy her marriage and reputation. My heart sank. I was trying to help. And then you met with my wife behind my back? After I specifically asked you to stay out of this? She had evidence, Jeffrey. Recordings and photos and— I know what she has, he screamed. She sent everything to her attorney this afternoon as proof that I come from a dysfunctional family with no boundaries. Proof that my mother is exactly the manipulative, controlling woman she's been saying I need to protect my kids from. The phone went quiet except for his ragged breathing. The judge was sympathetic before, he said, his voice breaking. She was starting to question Michelle's claims about my fitness as a father. But now? Now she's wondering what kind of support system I have. Now she's asking whether my family environment is healthy for children. Jeffrey, I'm sorry. I thought if I could prove Michelle was destroying other families— You proved exactly what she wanted you to prove, he shouted. That you can't help yourself. That you meddle and manipulate and insert yourself into situations where you don't belong. That you'll go behind people's backs and lie and scheme to get what you want. Each word was a knife. I was trying to protect my grandchildren. No, you were trying to be right. You were trying to win. Just like you always do. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I might lose my kids, Mom. The judge is now questioning whether I can provide a stable environment when my own mother proves I can't set appropriate boundaries with manipulative family members. My throat closed up. Jeffrey, stay away from me, he said, his voice flat and final. Stay away from my family. I'd rather lose everything than let you help me again. The line went dead. I sat in my car in my own driveway, staring at my phone, replaying every moment of the last 2 weeks. Everything I'd done to help had made things worse. Every move I'd made had been exactly what Michelle needed to prove her case. And the worst part? She'd been right about me all along. I couldn't sleep after that call. 3 a.m. found me staring at the ceiling, replaying Jeffrey's words on an endless loop. Stay away from me. I'd rather lose everything than let you help me again. But I also couldn't stop thinking about what Michelle had said at the coffee shop. The recordings, the documentation, the systematic planning. Something about it felt wrong, and not just because it was my family being dissected like evidence in a trial. Michelle was too prepared, too organized, too strategic. I padded downstairs to the kitchen where Jeffrey's business documents were still scattered across the table. He'd been too exhausted to collect them all when he left, and I'd been too shell-shocked to clean up. Now I spread them out properly, my bookkeeper's eye taking over automatically. 30 years of catching other people's financial mistakes makes you see patterns, and the patterns in these documents made my blood run cold all over again. But this time, I wasn't just looking at fake invoices. I was looking at something much worse. The vendor payments weren't random. They followed a schedule. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, dating back 8 months. Michelle hadn't just been stealing. She'd been systematically siphoning money from the business, creating false invoices, fake vendor accounts, even forging Jeffrey's signature. And Mark's, too. I pulled out my reading glasses and grabbed a calculator, doing what I do best, following the money trail. Sunshine Landscaping, $3,400 every 2 weeks for site preparation that Jeffrey's crew actually did themselves. Premier Office Solutions, inflated supply costs with delivery addresses that were just P.O. boxes. Elite Consulting Services, $2,800 monthly for business development that nobody had ever heard of. But the worst part? She wasn't just stealing from Jeffrey. She was stealing from Mark, too, building herself a nest egg while planning her exit with him. The amounts were staggering. Over $40,000 in the past 8 months alone. Embezzlement, fraud, forgery. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping or marital disputes. This was criminal. I sat back in my kitchen chair, documents spread before me like evidence at a crime scene. Which I realized they basically were. Jeffrey had handed me proof that his wife was a felon, and he didn't even know it. I had a choice. I could package everything up, send it to Jeffrey, and let him handle it however he wanted. Respect his boundaries like he'd demanded. Let him be the adult he claimed to be. Or I could take it directly to the authorities and Mark's divorce attorney, guaranteeing results but going behind Jeffrey's back again, proving Michelle right about me being controlling and manipulative. I told myself I was thinking about the grandchildren. Emma and Tyler deserved to know what kind of person their mother really was. They deserved protection from a criminal who was teaching them that stealing was acceptable as long as you were smart about it. But I knew the truth. I couldn't stand the thought of Michelle winning. Couldn't bear the idea of her walking away with half of everything Jeffrey had built while playing the victim card about his toxic, controlling mother. She'd spent years systematically destroying my family, and now I had proof that she'd been destroying other families too. I wanted vindication. I wanted everyone to see what I'd seen all along. That Michelle was dangerous, calculating, and willing to destroy anyone who got in her way. So I made copies of everything. Then I made more copies. Then I contacted Mark's attorney. Mr. Patterson? This is Madeline Clark, Jeffrey Clark's mother. I have some financial documents I think you need to see regarding your client's business partnership. The meeting took place that afternoon in Patterson's office. He was a sharp-faced man in his 50s who specialized in high-asset divorces, and his eyebrows climbed higher with every document I showed him. Mrs. Clark, he said finally, these amounts constitute serious criminal fraud. Are you certain these invoices are falsified? I've been a bookkeeper for 30 years, I told him. These vendor addresses don't exist. These service dates overlap with work that was already completed in-house. And look at the signature patterns. She got better at forging them over time. He was already reaching for his phone. I need to contact the prosecutor's office immediately. And my client needs to know his business partner's wife has been stealing from him too. 2 hours later, I was at the police station filing a formal complaint. Detective Morrison was a tired-looking woman about Jeffrey's age who took detailed notes as I walked through the evidence. Ma'am, she said when I finished, this is going to require a full investigation. Financial Crimes Unit will need to examine all the business records, interview the alleged victims, potentially freeze assets. Are you prepared for this to become very public very quickly? I thought about Jeffrey's face when he'd asked me to stay out of his life. I thought about Emma and Tyler caught in the middle of a criminal investigation. I thought about Michelle's smug confidence at the coffee shop. Yes, I said, I'm prepared. The next 2 weeks moved like a slow-motion avalanche. The investigation gathered steam as more evidence surfaced. Bank records confirmed the fake vendor accounts. Handwriting analysis supported the forgery claims. Mark's attorney froze business assets and demanded a full accounting of every transaction from the past year. Michelle's attorney tried to spin it as sloppy bookkeeping and marital disputes, but the pattern was too clear, too systematic. This wasn't a wife helping with the books. This was organized theft, disguised as legitimate business expenses. Mark turned on Michelle completely once his attorney showed him proof that money was being stolen from him too. His cooperation with investigators was immediate and thorough. He provided passwords, signatures for comparison, testimony about transactions he'd never authorized. But the family damage was catastrophic. Jeffrey's custody case was deteriorating rapidly. The judge saw a family imploding with financial accusations flying everywhere and decided the children should stay with their mother until things settled down. Supervised visitation only. I knew because Detective Morrison called to update me on the investigation status. I knew because Mark's attorney mentioned it when he asked for additional documentation. I knew because everyone was talking about it except the one person who mattered most. Jeffrey had stopped taking my calls entirely. When I drove by his apartment complex, I saw his truck in the parking lot and climbed the stairs to his door. I knocked for 5 minutes before he finally answered, opening it just wide enough to see me but not wide enough to suggest I was welcome. What do you want, Mom? He looked like he'd lost another 10 pounds. His eyes were hollow, his face gray with exhaustion. But worse than that was his voice, flat, defeated, empty of the anger that had at least suggested he still cared enough to feel betrayed. I wanted to explain. I started. The evidence was clear, Jeffrey. She was stealing from you and from Mark. The police confirmed. Emma won't see me, he interrupted. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? My 12-year-old daughter thinks her grandmother is a vindictive monster trying to destroy her mother. She asked me yesterday why you were trying to put Mommy in jail. And you know what? I couldn't even argue with her because it's partly true. I reached for him, but he stepped back. I tried to explain that Mommy took money that didn't belong to her. He continued, his voice cracking. But all Emma knows is that her grandmother called the police on her mother. That her grandmother is the reason kids at school are whispering about her family. That her grandmother cares more about being right than about protecting her feelings. Jeffrey, I was protecting her. Michelle is a criminal. You took away my choice. He exploded, finally showing some emotion. You decided what was best for my family without asking me. Again. Even if you're right about everything, even if Michelle goes to prison, even if I get full custody, I'll never forgive you for this. He started to close the door, then stopped. She won't even come to visitation anymore. My own daughter's afraid of me because she thinks I'm working with you to hurt her mother. You've done exactly what you always do. Decided you know best and steamrolled everyone else in the process. The door closed with a quiet click that somehow sounded more final than slamming. I stood in that hallway for probably 10 minutes, staring at the cheap wooden door that separated me from my son. Inside, I could hear his TV playing some sitcom with a laugh track, the artificial cheerfulness mocking the devastating silence between us. I had more evidence now. Detective Morrison had called that morning with updates, additional findings from the Financial Crimes Unit, more suspicious transactions, potentially falsified loan applications. If I pushed this information to the prosecutor, if I provided additional documentation to the court, it would strengthen the case significantly. It would also guarantee Jeffrey would never speak to me again. I could walk away now, let the existing investigation play out slowly, try to rebuild some relationship with my son while Michelle faced whatever consequences came naturally. Or I could push for maximum damage and win completely. But as I drove home, my phone rang. Jeffrey's number. Hope flared in my chest until I heard his voice. Still flat, still defeated, but with an edge of something that might have been panic. The prosecutor wants to file formal charges, he said without preamble. Michelle's attorney is trying to negotiate, but they have too much evidence. This is moving faster than I wanted, Mom. I'd planned to use this strategically in the divorce, but now it's completely out of my control. Jeffrey, her attorney is spinning this as a desperate mother-in-law making false accusations against an innocent woman. They're saying you've been trying to destroy our marriage for years, and this is just your latest attempt. The kids are hearing rumors at school. Emma came home crying yesterday because some kid asked if her mom was going to jail. My throat tightened. I'm sorry, but Jeffrey, she committed crimes. Real crimes. This isn't about our family disputes. It doesn't matter, he said tiredly. The damage is done. Emma thinks you hate us. Tyler doesn't understand why everyone's upset all the time. And I can't even defend you because what you did, going behind my back, calling the police without telling me, it's exactly what Michelle said you'd do. The line went quiet except for his breathing. She called me tonight, he said finally. Emma? She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She asked me why Grandma was trying to put Mommy in jail, why Grandma couldn't just leave us alone. My heart stopped. What did you tell her? I told her to ask you herself. Before I could respond, I heard voices in the background. A young girl's voice, thick with tears and confusion. Daddy, can I talk to Grandma? I want to ask her something. Emma's here, Jeffrey said to me. She wants to talk to you. I heard the phone being passed, then my granddaughter's voice. Older now, more articulate than the 7-year-old who used to help me measure flour, but shaking with emotion I'd never heard from her before. Grandma? She said, and the word sounded like an accusation. Hello, sweetheart, I managed. Why do you hate us so much? She asked, her voice breaking. Why can't you just leave us alone like Mom said you should? The question hung in the air like a sword, cutting through every justification I'd built, every rationalization I'd constructed. My 12-year-old granddaughter thought I hated her, thought I was the monster in this story. And the worst part? Looking at everything I'd done, every choice I'd made, every boundary I'd crossed in the name of protecting my family, maybe she wasn't wrong. But maybe monsters sometimes have good reasons for being monstrous. The investigation moved like molasses in January, but it was building momentum. Detective Morrison called every few days with updates that sounded promising but felt glacial. Bank records confirmed the fake vendor accounts. Handwriting analysis supported the forgery claims. The Financial Crimes Unit was making progress on tracing the money trail, which apparently meant they'd found Michelle's offshore account, but needed more paperwork to access it. Mark's divorce attorney was having better luck. Patterson had used my evidence to freeze business assets and demand a full accounting of every transaction from the past 2 years. Watching Mark's world explode in real time should have felt more satisfying, but mostly it just felt like watching dominoes fall. Inevitable and destructive and impossible to stop once you'd pushed the first one. Michelle's attorney was working overtime trying to minimize everything. Sloppy bookkeeping, they called it. Marital disputes. A wife trying to help with the family business and making some unfortunate errors in judgment. But the pattern was too clear, too systematic. This wasn't Martha Stewart-level creative accounting. This was someone who'd watched too many crime shows and thought she was smarter than the system. And Mark had turned on her completely. I knew because Patterson called me personally to update me on their cooperation. Once Mark's attorney showed him the evidence that money was being stolen from him too, his loyalty to Michelle evaporated faster than water on hot asphalt. My client is fully cooperating with investigators, Patterson told me over the phone, providing passwords, signature samples, testimony about transactions he never authorized. Mrs. Clark, your daughter-in-law didn't just betray your family. She played my client for a fool while systematically robbing him blind. Mark was singing like a canary about everything. The fake vendor accounts, the forged invoices, the way Michelle had convinced him she was just streamlining the bookkeeping process while actually creating an elaborate theft scheme. Apparently love makes you stupid in more ways than one, but the family damage was catastrophic. Jeffrey's custody case was falling apart faster than a house built on sand. Detective Morrison mentioned it during one of her update calls. Apparently the family court judge was getting regular reports about the criminal investigation, and she wasn't impressed with what she was seeing. Judge Williams is expressing concerns about the children's stability, Morrison said carefully. A family imploding with financial accusations flying everywhere, criminal charges pending. She's decided the children should stay with their mother until things settle down. Supervised visitation only for the father. My heart dropped into my stomach. But Michelle is the one facing charges. She hasn't been convicted of anything yet, Morrison reminded me. And frankly, Mrs. Clark, the judge is also concerned about the family dynamics that led to this situation. Multiple adults making accusations, family members calling police on each other. It doesn't paint a picture of stability for those children. So Emma and Tyler were staying with their criminal mother while Jeffrey got 2 hours every other week at some sterile family center. Because sometimes the system protects children right into the arms of the people destroying them. I knew this because Detective Morrison told me. I knew because Patterson mentioned it when he called about additional documentation. I knew because everyone was talking about it except the one person who mattered most. Jeffrey had stopped taking my calls entirely. For 3 weeks, I called every morning at 7:30 like always. For 3 weeks, it went straight to voicemail. His message was the same one he'd recorded 5 years ago. Hey, you've reached Jeff. Leave a message and I'll get back to you. Except he wouldn't get back to me. Ever. I tried texting. Radio silence, I tried calling his work number. His foreman said he was unavailable and suggested I try his personal phone, which sent me right back to that cheerful voicemail message mocking me with its normalcy. On a Thursday afternoon when I couldn't stand the silence anymore, I drove to his apartment complex. His truck was in the parking lot, covered with the thin layer of dust that meant he'd been home for days instead of working job sites. That worried me more than anything else. Jeffrey without work was Jeffrey with too much time to think. I climbed the narrow stairs to his second floor apartment and knocked, and knocked, and knocked. 5 minutes of knocking before I heard movement inside. The chain rattled, the deadbolt turned, and the door opened just wide enough for me to see half of my son's face. He looked like hell. Gray skin, hollow eyes, the kind of exhaustion that comes from not sleeping for weeks. He'd lost at least 15 more pounds since I'd seen him last, making his work clothes hang loose on his frame. "What do you want, Mom?" His voice was flat, not angry anymore, which would have at least suggested he still cared enough to feel betrayed. Just tired and empty and done. "I wanted to see how you're doing," I said. "You haven't been returning my calls." "There's nothing to say." He started to close the door, but I put my hand against it. "Jeffrey, please. I know you're angry, but Emma won't see me anymore." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually took a step backward. "What?" He opened the door a little wider, not because he wanted to let me in, but because he seemed to need the space to breathe. "My 12-year-old daughter refuses to come to visitation. She thinks her grandmother is a vindictive monster, trying to destroy her mother for no reason except spite." His voice cracked on the last word. "And you know what? I can't even argue with her because it's partly true. Jeffrey, Michelle committed crimes, real crimes. I have documentation." "I don't care." He leaned against the door frame like he needed it to hold him up. "Even if she goes to prison, even if I get full custody, even if you're right about everything, I will never forgive you for this." The words hung between us like a death sentence. "You took away my choice?" he continued, his voice gaining strength as the anger finally surfaced. "My agency, my ability to handle my own life like an adult. You decided what was best for my family and steamrolled everyone else to get it. Again. I was protecting, you were being right. That's all you've ever cared about. Being right. And now my daughter thinks I'm working with you to hurt her mother? She won't even come to the fucking family center because she's afraid of me?" He laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that comes right before crying. "Do you know what she asked me last week? She asked if I helped you call the police on Mommy, if I gave you the papers to hurt her family. A 12-year-old child thinks her father is a monster because her grandmother couldn't mind her own business." Each word was a knife. I had evidence of criminal activity. You had a choice. You could have given me the information and let me decide what to do with it. You could have respected my boundaries for once in your life. Instead, you did exactly what you've always done, decided you knew best, and to hell with what anyone else wanted. I reached for him, but he stepped back into his apartment. "She won't even take my calls anymore, Mom." My own daughter hangs up when she hears my voice, because she thinks I'm part of some conspiracy against her mother. That's what you accomplished with your protection. The door started to close again, and this time I didn't try to stop it. "You've done exactly what you always do," he said through the narrowing gap. "Decided you know best and steamrolled everyone else in the process. I hope it was worth it." The door closed with a quiet click that somehow sounded more final than slamming. I stood in that dingy hallway for probably 15 minutes, staring at the cheap wooden door that separated me from my son. Inside, I could hear the muffled sound of his TV, some nature documentary with David Attenborough's soothing voice, explaining how predators survive by adapting to their environment. The irony wasn't lost on me. I drove home in a daze, Jeffrey's words echoing in my head. "You took away my choice, my agency. Even if you're right about everything, I'll never forgive you." But when I got home, Detective Morrison was waiting in my driveway. She was leaning against her unmarked sedan, holding a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Her expression was serious but not unhappy, the look of someone who'd been working a case long enough to see the finish line. "Mrs. Clark," she said as I parked, "I have some updates I think you'll want to hear." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd first spread out Jeffrey's business documents 3 months ago. The documents that had started this whole nightmare, or maybe revealed it, depending on how you looked at things. "Mark's attorney shared some additional findings with us," Morrison said, opening the folder. "We've uncovered falsified loan applications dating back 2 years, business documents with forged signatures, and potentially identity theft. Your daughter-in-law used Mark's social security number to open credit accounts without his knowledge. She spread out photocopies of bank statements, loan applications, credit reports. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Michelle hadn't just been stealing from the business. She'd been systematically committing fraud on multiple levels, using Mark's identity to build herself a financial escape route. This strengthens our case significantly," Morrison continued. "The prosecutor is ready to file formal charges. Grand theft, fraud, identity theft, forgery. We're looking at serious felony time if she's convicted." I stared at the documents, seeing Michelle's careful handwriting on forged signatures, her systematic theft disguised as legitimate business expenses. She'd been so thorough, so confident in her ability to manipulate the people around her. "What happens next?" I asked. "That's partly up to you," Morrison said. "We have enough to proceed without additional evidence, but if you were willing to provide this information to the prosecutor directly, to testify about the financial patterns you identified, it would make the case airtight." She leaned forward slightly. "I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Clark. Your daughter-in-law's attorney is already trying to negotiate. They're claiming this was marital property disputes, that she had authorization to make business decisions, that the family conflict is clouding the real facts. Strong testimony from someone with your financial expertise could shut down those arguments completely." I thought about Jeffrey's hollow eyes, about Emma hanging up when her father called, about my granddaughter thinking I was a vindictive monster. If I provide additional testimony, it guarantees conviction? "Nothing's guaranteed," Morrison said carefully. "But yes, it would significantly increase the likelihood of maximum charges and maximum sentencing. I could walk away now, let the existing investigation play out slowly. The evidence was already strong enough to probably convict Michelle, just with more uncertainty about the outcome. I could try to rebuild some relationship with Jeffrey while the legal system handled the consequences, or I could push for maximum damage and win completely." "The prosecutor's office is downtown," Morrison said, checking her watch. "They're available this afternoon if you want to make a formal statement." I looked at the scattered documents on my kitchen table. Evidence of systematic betrayal, of a woman who'd spent years manipulating my family while stealing from them. Proof that everything I suspected about Michelle was true and worse than I'd imagined. Jeffrey would never speak to me again if I did this. Emma would grow up thinking her grandmother destroyed her mother out of spite. But Michelle would face the full consequences of her crimes. Mark would get justice. Future victims would be protected. The truth would be documented and undeniable. Sometimes being right matters more than being forgiven. I gathered up the documents and slipped them into a folder. I'll meet you there in an hour. Morrison nodded and packed up her own files. Mrs. Clark, I want you to know, what you're doing takes courage. Not everyone would be willing to pursue justice when it costs this much personally. After she left, I sat alone in my kitchen for exactly 15 minutes, long enough to think about Jeffrey's face when he'd told me his daughter wouldn't see him anymore. Long enough to remember Emma's voice asking why I hated them so much. Long enough to consider that maybe there was still time to choose differently. Then I grabbed my purse and car keys and drove downtown to the prosecutor's office. I knew exactly what it would cost me, and I was choosing revenge anyway. The prosecutor's office was exactly what you'd expect. Fluorescent lights that made everyone look dead, beige walls that had seen too many family tragedies, and the kind of carpet that showed every stain from decades of tears and coffee spills. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Martinez was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the sharp-eyed look of someone who'd spent years watching people lie about money. She spread my documents across a conference table like she was dealing cards, occasionally making notes in a legal pad covered with illegible handwriting. Mrs. Clark, she said after reviewing everything for the third time, this is substantial evidence of systematic fraud. Multiple felonies. Are you prepared to testify about these financial patterns? Yes, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. I want this documented properly. The amounts are significant. Over $200,000 when we include the identity theft charges involving Mr. Cunningham. Your daughter-in-law created an elaborate scheme here. She pulled out a timeline she'd been constructing. Fake vendor accounts dating back 8 months, forged signatures that got progressively better with practice, even falsified loan applications using Mark's social security number to secure credit she never intended to repay. The custody hearing is scheduled for next week, Martinez continued. These charges will definitely impact that proceeding. Are you aware that your son may not appreciate the timing? I thought about Jeffrey's hollow eyes, his daughter hanging up when he called. I'm aware. 2 weeks later, I sat in family court feeling like I was attending my own execution. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood paneling that had probably been installed when my son was born and chairs that squeaked every time someone shifted nervously. Jeffrey sat 3 rows ahead of me with his attorney, a tired-looking man named Davies, who'd been recommended by Mark's divorce lawyer. My son looked like he'd lost another 10 pounds since I'd seen him last. His suit hung loose on his frame, and he kept checking his phone like he was expecting news that would somehow fix everything. Michelle entered with her attorney like she was walking into a business meeting instead of facing potential prison time. Her lawyer was everything you'd expect from someone charging $800 an hour. Perfectly tailored suit, briefcase that probably cost more than most people's cars, and the kind of confidence that comes from usually winning. But Michelle looked pale. Composed, but pale. And when they started reading the charges, her carefully constructed facade began cracking like ice in spring. The state is filing preliminary charges of embezzlement in the first degree, fraud, and falsifying business records, the prosecutor announced. Evidence shows systematic theft of over $200,000 from Clark Construction, falsified vendor accounts, and forged signatures on multiple business documents. The numbers hit the courtroom like a physical weight. I heard Jeffrey's sharp intake of breath, saw Michelle's attorney lean over to whisper something urgent in her ear. Additionally, Martinez continued, we're filing charges of identity theft for using Mark Cunningham's social security number to open unauthorized credit accounts. That's when Michelle's composure finally broke. Her face crumpled, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely afraid instead of strategically vulnerable. Mark testified about the financial damage with the intensity of someone who'd been personally betrayed. His attorney had coached him well. He presented dates, amounts, and evidence with clinical precision. But when he described discovering that his business partner's wife had been stealing from him while sleeping with him, his voice shook with genuine hurt. She had access to all our accounts, he said, looking directly at Michelle. I trusted her completely. She convinced me she was streamlining our bookkeeping processes while she was actually creating fake vendors and forging our signatures. The business records were undeniable. Michelle's handwriting on falsified invoices, digital signatures that matched her computer's IP address, bank transfers to accounts opened with fake business licenses. Her attorney tried everything, claimed the money was marital property, argued that she had authorization to make business decisions, suggested that family conflicts were clouding the evidence. But the pattern was too clear, too systematic. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping or marital disputes. This was organized crime disguised as legitimate business expenses. Your Honor, Michelle's attorney said during a brief recess, My client is willing to discuss restitution in exchange for reduced charges. The evidence is overwhelming, counselor. Judge Williams replied. Restitution doesn't address the systematic nature of these crimes. I watched Michelle's face as reality set in. All her careful planning, her strategic manipulation, her confidence that she could talk her way out of anything. None of it mattered when the math was this clear. The custody situation shifted immediately. How do you award primary custody to someone facing felony charges? But Judge Williams also had concerns about Jeffrey's support system. Mr. Clark, she said, while the criminal charges against your wife are serious, I'm also troubled by the family dynamics that led to this situation. Multiple family members making accusations, police reports filed by extended family. This doesn't suggest a stable environment for children. Jeffrey stood to respond, but he looked too broken to feel victorious. Your Honor, I just want my kids safe and stable. I'll do whatever you think is best. His attorney requested temporary custody with the understanding that the criminal proceedings would determine long-term arrangements. But Michelle's lawyer wasn't giving up. Your Honor, my client's mother-in-law has been systematically trying to destroy their marriage for years. These charges represent a vindictive campaign by a controlling family member who can't accept healthy boundaries. She gestured toward me like I was Exhibit A in a case study of toxic grandmothers. Mrs. Lem Clark has inserted herself into private marital disputes, contacted other family members to spread accusations, and used her access to business records to build a criminal case against her own daughter-in-law. This isn't about justice, it's about control. The accusation hung in the courtroom like poison gas. And the worst part? She wasn't entirely wrong. I'd like Mrs. Clark to address the court, Judge Williams said. I stood up, feeling every eye in the room focused on me. This was the moment I'd been building toward for months, the chance to present my case, to prove I'd been right all along. Your Honor, I said, my daughter-in-law committed serious crimes against my family. I documented evidence of fraud because my son's business and my grandchildren's financial security were being threatened. And you felt it was appropriate to bypass your adult son's decision-making authority? The question hit home. I felt the evidence was too serious to ignore. Even when your son specifically asked you not to interfere in his marriage? Silence. Because what could I say? That sometimes being right matters more than being respectful? That I knew better than my 40-year-old son what was good for his family? I was protecting my grandchildren, I said finally. Judge Williams made notes for what felt like forever. Then she called Emma in to speak privately. My granddaughter walked into that courtroom like she was heading to her own trial, 12 years old and already carrying the weight of choosing between adults who all claimed to love her. She wore a navy blue dress I'd bought her for last year's school concert, back when my buying her clothes was seen as grandmotherly affection instead of manipulation. She wouldn't look at me, wouldn't look at Jeffrey, just stared straight ahead as they led her to the judge's chambers. 20 minutes later, she emerged with red eyes and that hollow expression kids get when adults force them to carry emotional weight that isn't theirs to bear. She walked past all of us without making eye contact with anyone. Based on my conversation with the child, Judge Williams announced, and considering all the evidence presented, I'm granting temporary custody to Mr. Clark. However, I'm also ordering family counseling for everyone involved in this situation. Jeffrey's victory looked like defeat. He nodded without emotion, like someone accepting a terminal diagnosis. Regarding Mrs. Clark's petition for visitation rights, the judge continued, I'm granting very limited supervised visits, 2 hours every other week at the Family Mediation Center, with reviews every 6 months, 2 hours every other week. Supervised visits like I was a danger to my own granddaughter. But I'd won, right? Michelle was facing prison time. Jeffrey had custody. Justice was being served. Michelle's attorney tried one last maneuver. Your Honor, my client requests bail pending trial. Granted, Williams said, but with strict conditions. No contact with business accounts, surrender of passport, and weekly check-ins with probation. Michelle was released, but her carefully constructed life was in ruins. The woman who'd spent years manipulating everyone around her was finally facing consequences that couldn't be talked away or strategically managed. As we filed out of the courthouse, I watched the whole sad parade in the parking lot. Michelle walked to her car like someone in shock, her expensive attorney already on his phone, probably calculating billable hours for her appeal. She looked back once at Jeffrey and Emma walking to his truck, and I saw something that might have been regret cross her face. But then again, maybe I was seeing what I wanted to see. Jeffrey held Emma's hand as they walked to his truck, but she was crying and he looked like he was barely holding himself together. When they passed me in the parking lot, Emma glanced over briefly. For just a second I thought she might say something, but then she looked away and climbed into her father's truck without acknowledging I existed. Jeffrey didn't even look at me, just kept walking like I was invisible. I sat in my car watching them drive away, feeling the strangest combination of victory and devastation. I'd won everything I'd fought for. Michelle was facing serious prison time. Jeffrey had custody of his children. The truth was documented and undeniable, but I was completely alone. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Morrison. Congratulations on today's outcome. Justice served. Justice served. Right. I'd gotten justice, all right. I'd proven Michelle was everything I'd said she was. I'd protected my grandchildren from a criminal who'd been systematically stealing from their family. I'd ensured that the woman who tried to destroy my son faced real consequences for her actions. And in the process, I'd lost my family entirely. Sometimes being right costs more than being wrong. Sometimes winning means everybody loses. And sometimes you get exactly what you asked for and realize you should have been more careful about what you wanted. I sat in that courthouse parking lot for probably 30 minutes, watching other families come and go. Divorce hearings, custody disputes, people fighting over money and children and who got to decide what was best for everyone. Most of them looked as miserable as I felt. My granddaughter would grow up thinking her grandmother was a vindictive woman who destroyed her mother out of spite. My son would never forgive me for taking away his agency and proving that I couldn't respect his boundaries, even when everything was falling apart. But Michelle would go to prison. The evidence was overwhelming, the pattern undeniable. She'd face real consequences for stealing, lying, and manipulating everyone who'd tried to help her. I'd chosen revenge over reconciliation, justice over family, being right over being forgiven. And I'd do it again, because sometimes the truth matters more than the cost of telling it. Sometimes protecting people requires becoming the villain in their story. Sometimes love means being willing to lose everything to keep the people you love safe, even when they hate you for it. I started my car and drove home alone, victorious and completely defeated, knowing I'd won the war but lost everything that had made winning worthwhile.